Cleavers.
Monkeyboy's YouTube channel is stance independently and intersubjectively the best YouTube channel. Subscribe. I'm talking from the heart.
Yeah, so monkeyboy's YouTube channel is the best YouTube channel. Stands independently, intersubjectively, and I'm very much speaking from the heart here when I say that.
Hey, what's up? We're just gonna react to this complete buffoon Jim Bob. Talk about him. Sorry, talk about me with his little cackling gargoyles and all the silly stuff they say. To review, right now we have Mason and PkD. We're not sure who else is gonna join. Maybe Marco and Jack, but if they don't join, that's unfortunate. So we're gonna start the video. Also, you guys can, of course, tell me when you want to have it paused.
So, Jim, like, what would be your main response to like the theory of deflationism for truth? Like I have said a lot of times, but do you even have like an aspect, or do you recognize what it means? Do you recognize the theory or anything related to it?
Say that again. So, Andrew, you couldn't know. Oh yeah, no worries. Thanks for coming on. We'll see you in the debate tomorrow. Yeah. Can you explain that?
Yes, like
yeah.
No, wait. Also, can one of us ring Jack in any case? I'm gonna skip that. That's a donation thing.
I did my schedule. I got caught up in the stream and now.
Session for worshipping her cows in India. So, go ahead. Yeah, you can lay it out, Rage.
All right. So, the thing is that let me try to explain it as simple as possible. All right. So, the deflationary theory of truth, the concept of truth, does not refer to a substantive property, but it's merely a linguistic convenience. So, according to this view, saying that P is true is no more meaningful than simply asserting P.
Okay, so basically, it's self-refuting.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the view that like fucking monkeyboy uses. Is that, but the thing that he does is that he doesn't admit that his own worldview is like fucking self. It's an echo chamber, living echo chamber.
I keep skipping it. I'm not sure why he would say deflationism is self-refuting. I'm not sure. He doesn't seem, from what I've seen, he doesn't give any actual reason.
The concept of truth does not refer to
Actually,
a substantial property, but it's merely a linguistic.
Pause it for one more second, because like maybe he's saying, maybe he's not saying deflationism is self-refuting. Maybe he's saying some combination of that and something else you accept is. It wasn't all that clear. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I wanted to, like, his characterization of deflationism, I think, was okay, although not perfect. But yeah, I'm not really sure. So maybe he'll explain why it's self-refuting.
Yeah.
Linguistic convenience. So, according to this view, saying that P is true is no more meaningful than simply asserting P.
Okay, so basically, yeah, it's self-refuting.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the view that like fucking monkeyboy uses all the time to argue. Yes. But the thing is that, but the thing that he does is that he doesn't admit that his own worldview is like fucking self-refuting, and he just presupposes it at the first, saying, "Oh, it's already true. It's just that you're not actually justifying why your worldview is more true than mine because mine is already true." That's what he does. Like,
yeah,
he doesn't say that.
It's like you can't grant people more time once they reveal that there's sophistry. Like if they accept blatant, clear, explicit contradictions, self-refuting statements that make nothing possible, including the statements they're making, and they reduce it all to nonsense. They're literally just making sounds. So them having a live.
So they're accusing me of having a contradictory worldview, apparently, but it's not clear what the contradiction there is. So I'm a deflationist about truth, and I'm not. Is that supposed to be it, or not? It's not clear what they're even accused. What's the charge, or at least what is the reported contradiction that they're charging me of?
Yeah, so I think what they're saying is actually that the view of deflationism is contradictory, right? And if we understand basic view of deflationism to be the idea that P is true if and only if P, right? So that would be like some basic explanation of deflationism. And I take other views like correspondence theory of truth to also agree with that, but they want to say like, look, there is something more to that. There is like more propositions, more things to say about truth. And that would be that there are certain correspondence relations to the world, right? And so the deflationist wouldn't like affirm this, right? He would say, well, the only thing we can say about truth is that P is true if and only if P, right? And you have different views of deflationism. One could be, one could endorse the redundancy theory, which is the idea that basically every sentence that contains the predicate is true can be removed from the sentence while the meaning is retained. Like this would be like sentences like the snow is white is true, you know? You can just say the snow is white and the sentence has same meaning, right? And they also said that you don't offer like reasons in favor of like deflationism, but there are like arguments for deflationism. And for redundancy theory, one argument would be that every sentence containing the predicate is true can be represented without it, right?
Well, it's kind of unclear there, because I take it that theories of truth are merely semantic, And what they're accusing me of is I'm not producing an argument or rendering arguments in support of the view. The way most people use um, truth-based language is captured by this theory. I'm not. I've never actually made the claim. Well, actually, I think I have made the claim. I have the suspicion this is how most people use it. That at least it captures the concept as I regularly use it. Just I think it's adequate in showing what I mean in a more, you know, maybe rigorous way than something like a primitivist account of truth.
But what I don't get is like because when he said something like you just say your view is true, uh, it wasn't clear if he's saying either like you just say that your theory of truth is true without further argument, or you just say like your view concerning whether or not God exists or on some other topic is true. Because I'm not able to. I heard the part about it being self-refuting, but then there's this other claim which is like you're saying something is true without any argument when maybe you should have an argument. I'm not sure what the connection is between them.
Yeah, they said stuff about me not justifying my worldview. So
It's already getting pretty vague, but yeah,
yeah,
maybe just keep playing it.
live stream, if they were entirely consistent with their view, they would have a live stream where they just make fart sounds because under their own view, there would be just as valid as any sort of proposition or counter proposition to anything. So they should just make fart sounds for their streams so that other people can participate at least freely. You know, just call in, make a different fart sound, you know, and so on. So it's like a waste of time. Plus, he's like in high school, that kid. He's like graduating high school or something. So
It's like 19.
yeah, so it's like it's like a.
But the guy is stupid. Like he's an echo chamber, living echo chamber. Same with his other. Like I
I'm
can
not
tell
in
you,
high
most
school.
of his friends just like support his view of this having
Can we pause
already
this for a sec?
presupposition of this worldview that is already true.
Yeah, so just like all the other stuff, it's just like again, he's not making any clear criticism of any of your views. As far as I can tell from what he said, he's kind of like throwing insults. So whatever, I guess we can skip over that. There is something
Yeah,
he said about like, everybody might as well just make these kind of noises, and that's kind of like the same as like having discussions or something. So I don't know if he's like maybe the claim there is that somehow you're committed to saying something like you know people aren't capable of saying things that are meaningful. Maybe that's like the claim, or like there's no or nothing is meaningful under your view. Maybe that's the claim he's trying to make. But I mean, he didn't give an argument for that. But I mean, to be fair, it didn't sound like he was just kind of like not being fully serious. He was maybe just kind of joking. So, but like still haven't really seen many arguments from him whatsoever.
yeah,
I'm suspicious you won't see the argument because there is a good chance he misunderstands what deflationism about truth is. Because it seems that he takes it to be that if you're a deflationist about truth, then everything you say is true, literally becomes true or is true.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. It sounds like he's saying. Well, it sounds like they might because people who don't really understand the kind of philosophy, they think like, oh, deflationism is like saying that truth is subjective or something, and truth is whatever you assert, and that's of course completely confused. So he could be saying that, but he really hasn't given us enough really to make a determination on whether he is or not. So I'm not really sure.
yeah. That seems like what he's saying. That to assert that to say something is true is to merely assert it. I think he's not realizing what's being said is to affirm P is to the same as endorsing P is true. But
Pretty true. And like he always says the thing, can you get an argument? Can you get an argument?
Well, it's that whole Jack Angstrank, unbearable character. You know that guy, right? He's like one of their apostles, so to speak, and he's
He's like,
he's the worst.
he trained monkeyboy.
He's training, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
he trained monkeyboy basically. Like Dart's trained.
yeah, Jack definitely trained me. See this. I want to see if we could get Jack in here. Jack, I don't know. He might be busy. I'm not sure what he's doing, but
Yeah, but I just say because again, there's just no argument there. It's
yeah,
just like, I mean, yeah, it's just, I mean, I'm just not really entertained by stuff like that. So there's not really an argument here. It's just kind of, he's kind of like throwing shade or insults, which is whatever. But I just kind of want to hear the arguments. Yes.
For that, you have an argument for that? I don't see how it follows. I don't see how it follows.
But the thing is that they don't understand that when we make an argument, the argument isn't going to be self-explanatory. The argument isn't going to defend itself. We need to actually have a justification for what we are asserting within the argument. So we're not just going and saying, "Oh, it's true because we say it." No, that doesn't. They think that presupposition is like that we just assert things.
Do you have an argument for that? I feel like when they go with that deflationary theory of truth, that's kind of like a concession to tag, because what they're saying is that there's nothing like the truth doesn't correspond to reality. That truth is just like a useful fiction. It's basically like a property of truth becomes like a property of a sentence. But if truth is a property of a sentence, that means they're just like defining truth into existence is what they're doing.
Yeah, because every time they say the next statement about it, it's like the problem with axioms. You go, it's an axiom. They go, an axiom is something that doesn't need justification. You go, is the definition of an axiom also its own axiom? You know what I mean? It becomes another axiom, and you go, okay, I see what's happening here. It's like you're just saying.
yeah,
Yeah, here I think this demonstrates that they may not understand like deflationism about truth, right? They take it to be like something like subjectivism about truth. I think this is what's going on, right? And the correspondence relation thing that they said, right? Like sentences that are true correspond to reality. Well, this is to assert that there is some to assert some metaphysical proposition that there is some special correspondence relation between sentences and reality, right? And presumably one doesn't want to inflate their own ontology with that metaphysic, right? And they can deny it. That doesn't mean, right, that when you say something is true, right, somehow this is being this is undermining your position and it's sending you into self-contradiction, right?
Yeah, he also says to accept deflationism is to concede to tag. So maybe the claim there is if you're a deflationist, then you have to, I don't know, accept that the arguments presented are sound in some way, or because of tag, you're adopting deflationism as a kind of revisionary view to escape consequences of tag. And that just seems to either misunderstand deflationism, misunderstand their own argument, which is tag, or both. Because even if you held frankly any other view of truth, whatever objections I'm sure any of us have to tag would not change much at all, regardless of the view of truth that's held. So I'm not really. It seems like he thinks that the reason you're a deflationist is because there's some problem you had with tag, and that's why you became deflationist. And that's also that also seems like a confusion. I think he mentioned something else. He said we don't think we're defining truth into existence. Well, I'm not quite sure what it is to say that truth exists. I don't. Certainly don't think truth exists in the same way a table or a chair does. So, I mean, that part is just a bit unclear. Maybe he can say more about it. But I also wanted to say about the reasoning, and this isn't even related to the main points, but about axioms, it doesn't even make any sense. He says, imagine somebody says, axioms are statements that require no justification. And he says, well, is that, that kind of definitional statement an axiom? Well, somebody could always just say, well, no, but that statement does require justification, but it's a definitional truth. It's an analytic truth. That kind of explains why it's justified. So the reason that isn't even relevant to anything you said, but it doesn't even make sense. His point there.
Yeah.
You're just defining something, and it's almost a contradiction to say an axiom doesn't need justification, because you're basically trying to make a justification about it not needing one, and that just grants them something that otherwise would require some sort of objective standard outside of themselves. I don't know, they all do this. They all just take this axioms approach, and it's you can either fight against it or just grant it and then run with your own axioms, which is always fun. You just start making up axioms.
Yeah, but the thing is that this is why I created some arguments to actually try to stop them being so retarded when it comes to arguments, because they think the argument can actually just explain itself.
Well, actually, that's a good point. I'll let you respond to this one. Kronik, I don't know if he's being facetious or satirical here or whatever. He says an axiom.
Come on.
They don't understand that when we make an argument, the argument
axiom, you know what I mean? It becomes another axiom, and you go, okay, I see what's happening here. It's you're just defining something, and it's almost a contradiction to say an axiom doesn't need justification, because you're basically trying to make a justification about it not needing one, and that just grants them something that otherwise would require some sort of objective standard outside of themselves. I know they all do this. They all just take this axioms approach, and it's you can either fight against it or just grant it and then run with your own axioms, which is always fun. You start making up axioms.
Yeah, but the thing is that this is why I created some arguments to actually try to stop them being so retarded when it comes to arguments, because they think the argument can actually just explain itself.
Well, actually, that's a good point. I'll let you respond to this one. Kronik, I don't know if he's being facetious or satirical here or whatever. He says an axiom is something that's self-evident. This is exactly what the problem is, right? You go respond to that.
Because what's self-evident to you might not be self-evident to me. So philosophers went this route, they vastly disagree about reality and what's self-evident.
Right. Self-evident is just another axiom. So you're axioms are self-evident. You go, what's self-evident? You have to say self-evident things are self-evident. Meyer Watson, you go, no, this is nonsense. Yeah, you can't say what's self-evident, because then again, you have to then say your sense data, interpretation of sense data is self-evident. You got to know that. More sense data, right? This is the problem that Jay always brings up in streams, that the sense data itself, the evaluation of the sense data, doesn't verify the sense data evaluation itself. So you're in faith. That's why Christianity is the only view that coherently accounts for what faith is, and every other view needs and applies faith, not axioms, not self-evident truth. Faith.
Well, the thing is, when we start with faith in Christ, that's going to be consistent with the Christian system. But they're going to start with faith in empiricism or something. That's not faith in their senses is not consistent with their sense system.
That's right. Or faith in their reasoning, which would then go to their senses, or faith in their evaluation of the world, again back to the senses. And that's all it is. That's why if you try to do theology from just reason and looking at the world, looking at nature, looking at your own.
I don't want to a lot of this stuff he's saying is just not even relevant to your views. So I don't want to even spend too much time on it, because he's saying a lot of stuff about it's not what he's saying isn't even very clear. This is self-evident, and so self-evident is self-evident. I'm not sure what he was saying there. He made the claim that Christianity is the only view that accounts for faith. I'm not sure what really he's saying. But what does it mean to say that? I'm not totally sure. But none of this is really he's not really levying a direct criticism of any of your views that I'm hearing. I don't know if you guys have anything else.
No, yeah, he's not. I mean, what he's saying is just extremely confused stuff. I think he's just saying you can practically just assert anything as self-evident, such that you can justify anything by saying it's an axiom or whatever.
Okay, yeah. So I guess it depends what he's saying there. Because if he's saying okay, what's self-evident to me might be self-evident to someone else. Well, yeah, that's true. And different people believe different things are self-evident, but I'm struggling to see the further point there. Maybe the idea is supposed to be well, you can't really privilege your view over somebody else's if that's true. Well, I guess it turns out when you're talking about privileging your view or somebody else's view, I take privilege to be a normative notion, and of course, I'm an anti-realist about normative notions. So I think, yeah, there isn't any objective facts of the matter as to what's to be preferred or what's the best. Now you could think about views as more. You can think in descriptive terms that some views are more likely to be true than others, and of course, different people have different beliefs about that as well. But the point about the privileging point, if it's just a normative point, it sounds like he's saying something that's kind of trivial. At least on my views about what normativity is. And if he's saying something else, like maybe he thinks we're strawmanning him into like something that's kind of trivial, well, he's free to clarify if he sees this video.
Yeah, and it's not he's because I'm not one who goes around asserting certain things are self-evident. So I'm not sure, is he talking about maybe what he's seen as prevalent among atheists that he would engage with, where they would make claims about things like the reliability of their senses are self-evident. In any case, that's just not addressing anything about me.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess we should proceed.
Senses, reasoning, you're basically arguing within the atheist paradigm already. There's no point. You have to bite the bullet and take the massive leap into faith, revelatory, then reason, then you do science. Not the other way around. Reason isn't the top tier. But people there's an idolatry of reason, even from some theist perspective. They almost kind of like even though it's from God, it's almost like they're like, well, he gave us reason, so reason can get us everywhere because he gave it to us, But that's not it, right? Because there's something that's not reason that we practice in. We're not like, for instance, if you go to divine liturgy, you're not reasoning your way through the participation, right? You're like, none of us are like reasoning in real time. Like, oh, I'm gonna reason this. I'm gonna really reason this through today. I had great. Like, oh, how's liturgy? It was amazing. I reasoned so hard today. It was amazing. Like, that's not it, right?
And by the way, can I like start making the argument for libel realism, because it's just an example of why I have to go to just like get these fuckers out of my back window and say, oh, you're a presup, you're a presup.
Yeah, presup me.
The thing is that I really have to wait for avoiding tag because I'm not a tag user, but the thing is that I have to avoid it because these fuckers are just trying to let the tag comes in.
Yeah.
And it's because sometimes I think a big problem with this is that sometimes we don't have the right people to use tag and they misinterpret so much. Like they have this horrible view of tag that they think it's like just asserting things and it is unjustified.
They have an allergic reaction, basically. You can see it in their face, literally. Like that thing clip I just showed of Peterson. The guy goes, I'm gonna
Yeah,
talk
for
about
here.
presup, and you just like flinches, like literally, like, can't.
Yeah, so I'll just say this very clearly. Yes, we now you talk about other people here. All of us have a horrible view of tag. Tag is unjustified. Here's why. Roughly it goes something like this. God is a necessary precondition for knowledge or some other thing. It could be logic, whatever, and we have that thing, so God exists. And no one will ever defend the first premise. If you ask them to defend it, they'll say something like, well, it's defended in virtue of the impossibility of the contrary, which is of course to just repeat the claim for anybody who's like familiar with like basic reasoning, basic logic. And so yeah, that's simply stated the problem. And so if anybody is watching this video, like one of the people here, all you'd have to do to kind of, I don't know, discount that idea is to just like give an argument for the first premise. Seems pretty simple to me.
Yeah. Yep. You just ask them to establish the contrary is impossible, which, of course, that's the modal language there is just some weaselly way of reasserting the first premise. So just get like a clear argument.
Yeah, can't engage, cannot.
See, you gotta frame the debate correctly because God isn't just like a normal fact, like about it's not like a fact of the shape of the earth or something. Because God is a standard of truth. So we're not just talking about normal. It's like, so my standard of truth is false. Okay, then what's the correct standard of truth?
Right. Yeah.
Flip it back on them, and they don't like it. Not even just the truth, the standard of truth, the source of truth, the truth itself.
Yeah, all of it.
Yeah,
Yeah, like there has to be an absolute source. Again, this is a problem when they argue. For instance, I was just going to show this one.
What does it mean to say God is the standard of truth? Like, is that like some some normative notion? Is that like a rule or something? Like, does anybody ever understand that God is the standard of truth? What the fuck does that mean? Is that like a theory of truth?
Yeah. Well, the thing about God being the source code for truths, maybe you can interpret that as truths that are not about God. And those are like explained by God, like causally or something, right? Where he's the source of those things existing. So maybe you determine certain facts.
Yeah, I think like the standard, I mean, this is like very common folk religious phraseology that makes no sense to me. Like I'm in the same boat. When you say it's the standard of truth, I'm not sure what that means. Like, surely you aren't saying that like I mean, it would be ridiculous if they said that somehow the concept of truth in some way has God in it or something. That doesn't even make any sense. Like truth is maybe when we talk about truth, we say propositions, sentences are true. It certainly has nothing to do with God, at least conceptually speaking. So unless they're using the words in a completely different way. And then when you talk about him being the source of truth, like it almost sounds like they're saying, that he creates or causes truth in some way, which is incoherent because I don't think truth is something that stands in causal relations. Now he could be talking about what you said, which is that God just kind of created the universe and everything, and so like he explains a lot of truths. I mean, maybe if they're saying that, then yeah, I just ask them, well, what's the argument for that? They probably wouldn't have one, although like that might. I don't want to assume against them, but I'm expecting them not to have one.
Yeah.
dude, this one guy I follow, he's a mess. He's like an ex-evangelical, and he's arguing, well, so God, God's morality, but he doesn't have to follow his own morality. They say things like this, and it really shows that they don't understand that the argument, the position is that God is the standard. It's not God has standards independent that he like wrote down or that are floating next to him in some sort of platonic notebook or something. It's that he himself, the being, the nature himself, is that the good. It's not a set of propositions about the good, but they can't think of this. They go, well, no, everything has to be propositional. Everything has to be like a set of things I can write on a notebook and check them to do them, right? Like the legalistic view of like operations. They just can't quite get this grasp this nature thing. How can a being be the nature if us humans, everything we know about things are all propositional? Everything we do is like, we're talking about and referencing things. We can't conceive the fullness of a being that has the nature of these things because we operate propositionally for the most part when we do stuff.
Yeah, can we pause here for a second?
Yeah.
I don't even know whatever he was saying about propositions. I don't even know what he's talking about. But when people say God is the good, I actually think like this is at the level of like a literal grammatical confusion. Because when I say something is good there is a predicate, the relation, but God is a singular term. So what is it to say that God is the good exactly? Like if I say as a paradigmatic example, donating to charity is good. What role would God play in that sentence? Would it be? I mean, surely it couldn't be saying that like donating to charity is God. That's not coherent. I mean,
But that's what he said. Like he said, like the good is God, and I take that he is not using is of predication there. He is using the is of equivalence there. Like God is literally the standard. God is goodness, right? So when you say donating to charity is good, he understands that sentence as donating to charity is God.
Yeah, which is doesn't even make sense. And so yeah, so hopefully he's able to clarify his view if he watches this. Another thing is like if he says that like okay, God like it's like this whole fragment of language you're just gonna have to discard. Like when he says God is good, if that's by identity, then like well when we question kind of whether God is in fact good or whatnot, it seems like unless he thinks like the identity is a kind of like empirical one and it's not like a necessary identity, as in it's maybe thinks like the identity between God and good is like the identity between water and H2O. But like when we use the word good, we're not talking about an object of some kind. To say something is good, it's like saying something is red or something is tall. It's not like saying water is H2O, which would be like, an identity relation between two singular terms. So it seems like to have this view of goodness, either he has to like somehow find a way of making sense of or paraphrasing all this ordinary talk where we use the words good, or he just has to be a kind of eliminativist about it, or just like get rid of it and say like we're confused or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that I recognize is he wants to say the phraseology he used is that good is a part of God's nature, and the nature language, the only ever interpretation I've gotten of that is to say that it's an essential feature of what it means for something to be God, right? It's like a part of the definition of God. So if you're saying good is God's nature, which just means God essentially is like it's an analytic feature of what's meant by God is that He's good. That doesn't inform you what the type of normative vocabulary there is even meaning. So all you're saying is that
Sure.
the intention of the word God is one where good is like essential to that term's meaning.
Yeah.
Seeing where they're coming from, but they never quite make this jump, apparently. Like, they just can't conceive of a being literally being the good. Not like, oh, we're waiting for God who says he's good to give us like a scroll or something. They can't conceive that the good would be eternally uncreated and not something.
Yeah.
Like for instance,
Yeah, well, maybe people can't conceive of that because it doesn't actually make any sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's gibberish.
Who was this guy? He might have died. He was a Platonist, like an atheist Platonist. I don't exactly remember what it is. I haven't read most of his things. Okay. Well, anyways, whoever this guy was, he had this view of divine conceptualism. Because I don't know if you're that view. I think when it used to be that he thinks that within God's mind, he has like this horrible anthropomorphic view of God, and he believes that when someone says that within the thoughts of God's mind, there are some sort of abstract
those are things that just like they're really
remember something. I do remember something about your debate that you had, like a TikTok with monkeyboy, and it was something related specifically to that part. It was when you said it was a performing contradiction and everything else. And he said that he believes in the color red, but he said that he's not a realist about color, right? Something like that. And you just pressed him on that and said that there's an objective standard for color red. And then he said that, yeah, frequencies. And I just wanted to fact check that like 7 times. It said, yeah, it is. The frequency is going to change. And like actually, the responded was that it was contingent upon the agents. So he means that it's supposed to be because humans have like different perspectives of the color. It's supposedly subjective, but no, we're talking about the frequency, not the humans.
Yeah, we're talking about the actual thing itself. The reference
A lot of confusion here. So yeah, so I think, and you can tell me if I can get in your view wrong. You're saying and this is probably the pretty fairly standard view, although there are other views, but I'm sure your view is something like this. Well, color is a subjective phenomenon. People can look at the same thing and have a different phenomenal color experience in some way. And there isn't like, to say that something has a color is not like saying, it has a certain like position or volume because color, like saying, if I say something is red and somebody else says it's blue, and let's assume that we're not like, either we're not equivocating, so we're using the words to pick out different phenomenal experiences because typically we don't do that. Or at least what I mean is that like typically when we use the word red, although it could pick out different phenomenal experiences, we'll use the same term because of how we use color words. But for here, let's just imagine that we have a kind of inverted spectrum, and somebody looks at an object, they see it as red, the other person sees it as blue. You're saying color is that sort of phenomenon, am I correct?
Yeah, that's some type of private qualitative trait of objects.
And of course, they say like now their point is like, well, no, when we talked about color, we're just talking about like the wavelengths or the frequencies of certain like light, light waves in the electromagnetic spectrum or something. And all that's really doing is equivocating. I mean, like, because you don't deny that there are facts of the matter objectively in some sense about whether this wavelength of light is considered visible or what its frequency is or whatnot. You're just saying people have different phenomenal experiences associated with those frequencies, and so it seems like he's just not tracking the point, unfortunately.
And it's almost in a, like something that's like apparent, because what I don't expect the folk person to mean when they use color language is that they're talking about some wavelength of light, right, in some instance of time. And they say, oh, that's a nice red ball, that they're somehow referring to like some measured wavelength or anything.
Exactly.
Yep, it's pretty on
And
point here.
but the thing is, by him saying it's dependent on the agent, that is to say, bro, all of reality is just about your perception. We wouldn't deny perception as an aspect, but him saying, no, it's all dependent on that, he has to apply that critique to his own statement.
Yeah, that's already just a mischaracterization. To say that color qualities are ones that are qualitative and don't refer to something in the external world doesn't have anything to do about my entire, like, all about, or a view that reality is like entirely subjective or something.
The inference there was, unironically, inference seemed to be one property depends on your experience. Therefore, all of reality depends on your experience. That actually seems to be the inference.
Yeah.
I wonder if he thinks
Yeah.
that's valid. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of ridiculous. So, like, I assume like Jim Bob will be like subjectivist about what a good music is, right? Would he use the same inference that he used against you on his own worldview, right? Like, if something is subjective, then everything, then the whole reality is subjective. That sort of thing. Like, obviously, the conclusion doesn't follow, right, from the premises that that he used there. But like in his head, probably this is a good argument, right? So yeah, that's a good question for Jim Bob. Although I know that he's like dishonest debater, I wonder whether or not he will address that.
Yeah, maybe he just doesn't understand the gravity of what's being said there. Maybe he thinks I'm saying because certain facts of perception are ones that are subjective and we perceive reality. Maybe he wants to say all facts about my perception of reality are subjective. In that case, he might be saying something trivial.
Yeah, it could bottom out. Like he might, if you actually analyze his terms, because like either we have a claim that's like obviously false, like we discussed before, or a trivial one, which is like, well, your experiences are mind dependent. Like he might just be it might bottom out into some kind of triviality that even he himself would not disagree with. So yeah, I guess those seem to be the two most plausible interpretations. But like I said, he's always welcome to clarify any of his statements here.
Yeah.
It's all dependent on that, which you couldn't know for his own view. So he's a nonsense. He probably gets off with a lot of these other philosophy people.
Just like,
yeah, just like, I cause philosophical mayhem. I love it. The problem is they have no purpose, right? Like all the counter apologetics, myth vision, all of these like.
I wonder what, because this is a fairly popular view, the one that I have. So if he's saying that it's nonsense, is he also holding that to those who, in the population of academic philosophy, have similar views that it's all nonsense? Because that seems kind of strange. I mean, he's obviously not read in the literature.
Yeah, like you remember in the beginning when he said that the atheists should like do a video where they're just farting and like not saying anything, right? I think this is what he's doing right now.
Yeah.
Like it started with him claiming deflationary theory is like self-refuting, although he didn't understand what deflationary theory is. Somebody had to like explain it to him, and there, as I mentioned, different views of deflationism. It was unclear about which view they were referring to. Is it redundancy theory? Is it disquotationalism? Which deflationary theory of truth is? And of course, they present no argument. They just asserted that if one accepts this view, then they undermine their own view, like by a contradiction. We saw no argument for that. Then they went into like evaluative standards and like morality and the good being equivalent to the God. They didn't say anything substantial there. They were just like farting, literally. They said things that don't mean anything, right? Like God is good. What the fuck does that mean, right? So I find it ironic that he said that atheists should be doing that when he himself is actually doing that.
And it's funny because I think they mentioned they were criticizing, they're kind of imputing him for like asserting things without argument, but it's kind of really what's happened, at least thus far. But maybe he does have arguments in like the last, there's like what, 8 minutes left?
Yeah. Also about that thing, anyways, isn't it? I don't exactly recollect what was said, but they like mocked me or mocked the type of people who, find controversial premises in an argument and then ask for an argument supplementing that, and then they like mock that. And then what they said is that they don't just assert the premises of tag without having further arguments in defense of those. So it's kind of strange what they're saying. That you ask for the argument and you're saying they can deliver it, but they're mocking asking for an argument. It's like it doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah, it's a bit strange. It's a bit strange, certainly.
massive channels that dedicate their entire week and hours of their life to counter apologetics, you simply ask them why are you doing what you're doing. Their own view would have to say consistently that they're determined to. That there is no reason. There's no reason.
You're presupposing that they like answer a question. You gotta understand.
Can we pause there actually?
They're literally trained to never answer a question, and they like.
So he said like their own view. So I assume there was a claim there, which is like, well, atheism, entails something like determinism. So that's just obviously false. I mean, you can be an atheist and not believe in determinism. So maybe he's not saying that. Let's just try to like steelman it further. Maybe he's saying, well, these people are typically like physicalist or materialist, and so the conjunction of atheism and physicalism or materialism entails determinism. Also false as well. You could hold both of those views and still not be a determinist. So he must be saying something like, well, the views that most of these people hold commit them to determinism. But he hasn't given any reason to think that. And even if that were true, he said, well, he's somehow hinging on this idea that like if determinism is true, then you have no purpose or something. Why would that follow? Like maybe he's defining purpose in a way where there's no purpose if determinism is true. But under the ordinary normative concept of purpose I have, which you could think of as something that's kind of informed by the goals and desires of agents, then determinism has nothing at all to do with whether people have purposes or not. So I guess if he's using my concept of purpose, I'd want him to first acknowledge that there is absolutely no contradiction with there being purpose and determinism being true. Then I'd also like him to show what exactly are you saying when you say they would have to say that they're determined.
Yeah, but he made it appear as if there's like some disjointed entailment of what you're committed to saying, that well you do this because you're determined to, or you do it for literally no reason. That's what he said. So he's saying
okay.
that it's either like determined or like something about my actions, and what explains my actions is there exists no explanation, or there is no explanation at all for those facts.
Yeah, and it seems pretty bizarre. Like if you were to ask somebody like, why did you do this? Saying they were determined to do it like, provides no information whatsoever. It's not an appropriate answer to that question. If somebody were to ask me why I did something, well, I'll tell them about my values and desires and my motivations. Saying I was determined, let's just say saying I was determined has almost no relevance whatsoever.
It's
And
just
would just
saying
make
there's like a
anybody look at
sufficient
you.
explanation without informing you what it is.
Yeah, pretty strange. But yeah, I guess that's all I have to say there. So I guess we can move on.
And they like muddy up the whole conversation. They'll ask for like infinite arguments or infinite definitions of words, just dodged away. And they, what was the last thing they do?
They don't answer questions. Is the key one. Though. Like, look at the chat. Like, when I corner Breakfast Tacos on something so key to his position that if he answered, it would be over. He just out the door every time.
They'll give like a response, but a response isn't necessarily an answer.
No, it's not. Right. So.
Anyhow. Yeah, by the way, another thing is that I don't get how confident can someone be when adapting to anti-realism or any of those perspectives, because I've seen like a lot of other people right here using different types of formulas and all this sophisticated language when it comes to formulating sentences and all these things. And it's in such a confident way that when you look into the core of their main position, which is for most of them anti-realism, it's just like so weak, because at the core it performs a performative contradiction. It's just like so bad. It's just like saying that it's like some type of string holding up everything that can just build like a whole nonsense over it.
Yeah, I try to engage with all these massive subcategories because
Just pause there for a second. I just wanted to note he said something about anti-realism. He didn't specify like what anti-realism he's talking about, whether it's like moral anti-realism or whatnot. And he said there's a performative contradiction, but he gives no argument or explanation for what it even is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I assume he's talking about moral anti-realism, right? Why think that if somebody is like that if somebody is anti-realist about morality, they're like contradicting themselves in practice? That would, like, I understand that to mean something like, well, this person is acting as if he were a moral realist, but he isn't, right?
Well, it's ambiguous because in the following or couple responses earlier, they were responding to the anti-realism about color. So maybe they are just broadly talking about people who are confident in anti-realist views. But in any case, to say that it's like it's a performative contradiction. Maybe they want to say the way you use language is one that's like existentially committing. Yet, while you perform utterances that are existentially committing, you also convey things like these things do not exist, right?
Yeah, in other words, you say things. So let's say if you're an anti-realist about X, right? You say X does not exist. You say other things about it, but in doing that act, it entails somehow that X does exist. So if you're saying that about either moral anti-realism, color anti-realism, I mean, certainly hasn't really shown what the entailment is or where the kind of performative contradiction is.
Yeah, but think how silly it would sound like if I say something like, this food is good, right? And by that I mean that I like it, right? Would he say that this is a performative contradiction to say the food were good because I'm like stealing the language of the gastronomic realist? That would be a silly thing to say, and why one would grant that evaluative terms are sort of like the realist terminology, right? And nobody else can use. It's just silly. In every other context.
Exactly. Like, just you could say the same thing about the color example. If I say, well, this is red, does he think that I'm saying something that commits me to saying that, like, there is some kind of independent redness somewhere that's not, kind of phenomenal concept derived from my experiences? Like, I don't know. Maybe he does, but as always, like there really hasn't been much insight provided.
People hate this. It's a reduction. I just say, dude, either truth and knowledge are discovered or they're fabrications. Like, so every view that you listed, it ends up being the same thing where someone's like, well, no, we're just crafting these things and they're useful fictions that we crafted and we're pretending to operate like there's truth. There's only two options. I have not heard a third one. You're either discovering it or you're inventing it. Some people say both. I would say, no, it's not both. We might invent some mediums in which we can talk about. We invent language and symbols. Those might be arbitrarily crafted. But what they're discovering, what they're actually uncovering, mathematics, geometry, philosophy, and all these things, are not, they're not, if they're fabrications, there's no point in debating because any of the conclusions are fabricated. So it's the opposite versus autonomous.
It's either going to be that the order and the patterns in the world are inherent in the fabric of reality put there by God, or they're imposed by our minds.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's
the other thing that I want to say is that,
well, that's clearly not a true dichotomy.
Yeah, what he said either they're imposed by our minds or they're
They're by God,
created by God. Yeah, I wonder if so if the claim is not exactly dichotomy, I wonder if there's an argument for that dichotomy. But I mean, I think like we were wondering if there was an argument 7 minutes ago. There probably isn't.
Yeah, and also when he says like either truth is like fabricated or discovered, like truth about what, right? Is he talking about moral truth? Is he talking about truth about like descriptive sentences, like truth about what? Because like presumably one could be realist about like descriptive sentences, but when it comes to like prescriptive talk and all the normative talk, they could take the anti-realist position. So like he, really, he's generalizing, right? He's saying, basically he's saying if you're anti-realist about moral truth, then you're anti-realist about like all truth, all types of truth, something like this. That's how I understand it. But I'm not sure if that's what he has in mind.
Yeah, because like he is also making this point that like either proof is either created or discovered in some way. And I'm gonna be charitable here. I'm gonna assume by created either he means something like is a kind of construct or is like subjective. Maybe that's what he means by created as like a kind of encompassing term. But he should agree, presumably, like unless he thinks every truth is objective. Presumably he also agrees that like there are subjective truths. Like if we start a club and I say, well, and I declare that the name of the club is X or something. Surely he agrees that like that truth depends on my stipulation. And surely he agrees that when people say movies are good or bad, those truths depend on their stances. And but the way he's using the language, it makes it seem like he actually doesn't think that. And so I don't want to be unfair to him. I want to assume that he does think that. And maybe he's like talking about some specific substantive truths that haven't really been like clearly explained what exactly which ones he's talking about, but maybe you can like get an idea of what he's talking about. But it is a bit unclear.
Yeah, I mean that's like a charitable interpretation of what he means by creation, but the fabricated stuff seems less inclined to meaning something like that. It seems like he wants to say something like more than they're both like some type of fiction or turn on stances. But in any case,
it's worse. What he's saying is worse because when he say, "Well, that truth is like fabricated," it already carries a negative connotation, right? That's something about this truth is like lacking, like it's not like the objective truth. It's not like the capital T truth, why he's using like language that carries negative connotation, like the example that Cartesian gave, like with the club, like, if he names his club, he gives it some name, right? Would he say, well, that's not really true, you fabricated that? Like, look how it sounds,
Yeah.
When it comes to other types of things, I've seen people use this stupid fucking arguments. They didn't mention when we had that debate with the other guy, is that they said, there's different types of logics, and when they say and refer to that, they refer to error-consistent, intuitionistic, and other types of like fuzzy logic. The thing that they don't fucking understand is that those logics are not actually different. They're just extensions from classical logic, from the realist position of logic. Because itself, they cannot. If those systems actually had different types of logics, they would collapse immediately. If they didn't have the three primordial rules.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Can we
Mason
pause
can
here?
tear this up.
Yeah, so a lot of confusion there. He mentioned pair-consistent logic, intuitionistic logic, fuzzy logic. The first claim he made was that these systems are extensions of classical logic. That's false. In fact, intuitionistic logic and pair-consistent logic, these logics are broadly speaking called subclassical logics, which means they're not extensions of classical logic, rather they're in some way um, things that result from removing things from classical logic. So in pair-consistent logic, you remove the validity of explosion, which is the idea that everything follows from a contradiction. Intuitionistic logic, we remove the validity of the sentence paired with P. In other words, love exclude the middle, and also the validity of like double negation, elimination, etc. So yeah, so the first claim was that they are not extensions. He said they're extensions of classical logic. That's obviously false, unless he's using the terms in some completely proprietary way that doesn't reflect how they're used, like in the literature or like mathematics. Now, the next claim he made was that if they were not extensions of classical logic, they would all collapse or what? I'm not sure what he means by that. One interpretation is that they would be trivial. So maybe he means that if they were not extensions of classical logic, the logic would literally be trivial in the sense, and by trivial I mean you could literally deduce any formula in the system. You can prove anything. Right? Well, that's false because intuitionistic logic and pair-consistent logic are not extensions of classical logic, and they're non-trivial. And they're a range of, so that interpretation, he's just saying something completely wrong. But maybe he has some other interpretation, and we really can't know what they're saying here because they might be using terms in proprietary ways. They might just be saying like stuff that doesn't have any clear meaning whatsoever. But at least on those interpretations, it's completely wrong.
Yes.
Like you couldn't discover those things without those three classical foundations, and without those, so you always ask them like, cool, could you have discovered fuzzy logic and pair consistent, which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, tries to reject the law of
Discover.
It actually does. There's like a problem with this view is that it actually doesn't
Actually, pause there because
it actually just like avoids using it for specific.
yeah, so both were wrong. So he said pair-consistent logic rejects the first third of the LEM, then they said no, the LNC. Well, actually, both are wrong. Pair-consistent logic are logics that deny the validity of exclusion, and that's the idea, again, like I said earlier, that from a contradiction, anything follows. So there are pair-consistent logic like the logic LP that actually have the law of non-contradiction. There are pair-consistent logics that do not have the law of non-contradiction. So I wanted to make that clear.
Context, because it allows contradictions to make into a wording type of how do I say it, a contradiction explosion. It's just basic things, so they just like think that it's simply saying, oh, they're rejected law. It's not logic. It's not logic. It wouldn't make sense if they actually rejected it universally. None of this is coherent. They wouldn't differ from anything actually. So only system is they avoid simple factors.
I saw Jay Dyer. I seen Jay Dyer answer this question, and he said, I can't remember exactly. I'm going to do justice. He said something to the effect of like, you can see the point that you like theoretically like deny the law of non-contradiction, but then he said it doesn't like change the fact that we have these like an architect can design a bridge as a concept, and then we can like play the concept like aligns with reality. You see what I'm saying? Like that has to still be like explained.
No, but also, yeah, but even theoretically, I forget. I don't even know if
I genuinely,
said, well, we don't need.
I cannot even make sense of what he just said about the architect, and I couldn't even.
Yeah.
This is like the first time where I can't even like say anything about what he said because I'm not even sure what he would. I'm not even sure.
Yeah, I don't have an interpretation of that. Like I'm not sure what that's even saying. PkD probably.
Yeah, I think I have like an interpretation of what's going on here. I don't think they're saying anything meaningful. This is like he's just farting here. Like they're not saying anything substantive. They're like just expressing their emotions. Nothing propositional here. I think that Cartesian could respond.
Yeah.
Contradiction, and the other person responded, well, you just used it, like by saying that. So like when you theorize something and you say, I'm theorizing that we don't need the law of non-contradiction. Well,
did you catch that?
Yeah, so I think this is like a kind of another like low level point people often make who aren't familiar with like philosophy, more generally even the philosophy of logic. They'll say, well, if I make a sentence, hey, I don't think the law of non-contradiction is true. They'll say, well, hold on, you're just using the law of non-contradiction there. First, it's not true in any way. Like if we imagine, like let's say we imagine the eyes of somebody who rejects the law of non-contradiction. Well, in rejecting it, they in no way are actually relying on the law of non-contradiction. And to say that they are is really to just kind of reassert your own view. Maybe in some way every sentence entails or implies the law of non-contradiction. And you can do that, but it's certainly not any sort of interesting philosophical dispute. Imagine if like I had a view and every time you said something contrary to it, I just said, well, hold on, that's false because I disagree or I have a different view. Well, presumably if somebody says they reject the law of non-contradiction, they don't share your view, and merely reasserting your view is not making any progress in the conversation. I'm not sure if he thinks that's somehow a useful conversational tactic, or I really don't know.
Maybe if the claim is that from that type of sentence you can somehow infer maybe like certain meta-linguistic principles, like the LNC or whatever. If the claim is that from just that natural language expression, I deny the LNC, you can somehow give a proof that the LNC is somehow like used there, then that's just another thing he's not providing insight as to like showing how that's the case.
I certainly would like to hear. I mean, which is not even to say that I deny the LNC, but I would like to hear him explain to me how, of course I do have a non-classical view of logic, but I don't really have a position on the LNC. So I'd like to hear him explain how, at least to me, why I would be committed to the LNC by saying I don't accept the law of non-contradiction, even if I don't like deny it per se.
Well, that theory itself can't also be the opposite of itself in your theory.
I mean, you're using it. The thing is that they don't understand what's the difference between inconsistently using it and consistently using it, because they think that when it comes to these different types of logics, which I don't like to call them different types, I call them just extensions for classical logic. They just think that it completely differs, but actually it's just like some type of extension. And the thing is that they don't reject the three primordials. Is that they just mainly try to adapt them to avoid them a little bit inconsistently. And when it says inconsistently, I don't mean it the wrong way. I mean it uses them for specific contexts to help out in specific situations where they have to do formulations. Or they have to, you want me to like reuse some of one of the most absolutely idiotic things that I have like ever read. And I think this is from monkeyboy. Okay, so just
really have that for this kid, huh?
Personally, I just find it I find it annoying most of the time. Like, no, actually, that's a good response to him. So yeah, just to lay it out. Okay, so here's the thing. He says, it's definitely more likely that if logic was discovered, it'd be more useful, and not if it was convention. Like imagining a formal language to a language we don't have. Okay. So from that.
Okay, this is like extremely. So he said that I've said that it's more likely logic is useful if it was discovered than invented. No, I've never said that. If maybe he meant to say the opposite, funny enough, I've never said that either. I never said it's more useful if logic was created or invented rather than discovered. But
Yeah, yeah, I'm not even sure I get like this whole dispute about whether logic was discovered or invented. It seems like this turns on a dispute about whether um whether I guess like the real dispute is like whether logic is something that was out there that already exists, um or whether or not, there is no object that is logic. And I think that dispute just turns on what it even means for something to exist, and maybe other metaphysical concerns. And
oh well,
um
I think he's maybe taking this from, maybe he had the impression because the video where I talked to what's his name, Mello, that idiot on logical realism, and he said that
okay.
the utility in advancing things like sciences and fields using logic, right, is reason to think it exists. And I said I'm not convinced of that. Maybe he got the
Yeah.
impression that I'm saying that I would think, well, yeah, maybe he misspoke and he had the impression what he meant to say, and he got the impression from me denying that is that I have the view that if logic was invented, that it's more useful than discovered. But
Yeah, I mean, well, it seems strange there. I'll just say briefly, like, the usefulness of logic doesn't, to me, indicate whether or not it is something out there, or whether, like, if we can even, we have to, like, assume we understand what this means, like, out there exists, whatever. Like, logic being, in some way, very useful for scientific and mathematical theories, that doesn't really tell me much intuitively about whether or not it is a Platonic entity or it isn't. And so if he does want to kind of use this argument against somebody who's a nominalist and has more foot in this dispute, then he would probably have to like say more than just like the idea that it's like successful and useful to it is something out there. Um no, like it is like this what he's saying is at least for the first time, it's kind of in line with arguments that like in some way have been given. This idea that like logic is like indispensable or like mathematics is indispensable to certain scientific theories or whatnot, or and the same thing can be said about mathematical objects. So this is really like the first semblance of like an actual argument I may be hearing. But yeah, like he'd have to presumably say more to get from like okay, it's very successful or very useful to it's a Platonic entity. But even this is not really engaging much with like anything you've said because it seems like he's failed to understand what you said properly.
yeah, exactly.
You make your own response to that.
Yeah, it's a nonsense question. You're not doing yourself a service to continue even focusing on it because it's like you're just in awe with the extent of how nonsensical sophists will go. You're just like, is it possible to get worse? And you're like, show me worse.
The irony.
It's always going to be really bad from that view. Like you're just going to be constantly in awe with this stupidity. But again, he's like he just graduated high school. Like he's graduated high school. He's probably an outcast in high school, and he found his little clique on Discord of like back and all these nerds who are sort of farming him as like the next big sophist online. He's gonna have to run that course, poor kid. He's gonna have to run that course.
Yeah, and the other thing is that according to him, he's a
Or a kid. Yeah, I mean, like again, like just like there wasn't really any arguments there, so I'm not. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe he thinks I don't even find that funny to be honest. Like some jokes, insults, fine, but like I don't know. Like with these, I just don't really see the comedy. It's like kind of like oh, this guy has different views than me. Oh, he's bad. I mean, okay. No.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's not anything substantial, but it's not accurate to say I just graduated high school. That's number one. I'm like
Yeah, it's
in my
like
second
there's like
semester.
just like factual inaccuracies in the apparent like joke.
Yeah, I'm like on my second semester of university. One, two. I don't know if he's saying because someone's an atheist or maybe because I enjoy like philosophical discourse that I'm probably a nerd. But I don't see how that's not something that is had of him where he debates like tag and the metaphysics of God and God's like these modal concepts. He wants to say like it's necessary, probably in like some logical metaphysical modality, right? So I don't see how he's not just using a large range of very complicated philosophical devices in conversation as I do, to say that I was probably an outcast. I was most definitely not an outcast, and I'm most definitely not just. I'm not one who just graduated high school, but these shots are more funny than they are like infuriating or anything. I don't think I could take these serious. I don't think he aims to be serious either. I think he's just being like a satirical or something,
he's
or
taking
maybe
facts,
not.
but of course,
That
it has to be the case,
mean
right?
that doesn't
Yeah,
converge on you?
yeah, exactly. But the thing is that the guy again makes incoherent statements saying, "Oh,
Wait, doesn't exist under my own view? Well, I wonder how he would defend that. My views
Or what did he
somehow.
say? He said you're committed to saying that something doesn't exist, or
Yeah, the other guy, I think his name's Rage. I might be wrong, but the other guy said now he's defending trans rights, and Jim Bob
oh
responded, "Oh, the thing that doesn't even exist under his own view."
wait, hold on, let's break that down. So he's the first of all, he's defending trans rights. I mean, there was no criticism. Like, so I hear that, or let's say an ordinary person hears that. I'm sure they're wondering, wait, why is that a bad thing? And really, there was no argument raised for why that would be a bad. In fact, he just like said it. in like a tone that would indicate that it's a bad thing, but like there was no further like point to make. Now maybe the expectation is okay, I'm talking to my audience and our audience recognizes this is a bad thing. But I feel like there has to be some like it seems like it's also useful to make some argument or give some reasons for why it might be bad. Given that like, other people might react to the video, whatnot, there might be, people who don't share your view. Maybe at least say like one sentence about like why that's like a bad thing. But whatever, there wasn't anything there. He also did mention that on your view, trans rights don't exist. Well, first of all, like I don't think rights are so like once again, like there are different notions of exist, and rights don't exist in the way chairs do. But if he's saying something like on your view, people don't have rights, well, what's the argument that you're committed to that? And one thing he might be saying is that, well, you're a moral anti-realist, and rights are just some stance independent thing. And I'm sure like PkD already knows in his head like how ridiculous that is because like of course, then all he's merely doing is equivocating on the notion of rights from what you're using.
That's right. And maybe, as you mentioned, he could like suppose like, look, he could think the only way you can defend like certain right is to be like a realist about it, right? Like, look, this could be like one reason why people that are realists are motivated to defend some right. If we cache ethics in like rights, but there could be like other reasons. For example, maybe monkeyboy doesn't like those people to be harmed, for example, right? And then he goes and he advocates for certain right. That's a good enough reason. Or maybe he wants just his voice to be heard in society, right? So other people know how he thinks. There could be like other motivations that people could have in defending certain applied ethical position, right? Why it would only be, the idea that one is a realist, right? And I understand moral realism to be the idea that there is a stance-independent moral fact, right? This could be like one thing, right? Why people who believe that are motivated to defend it, right? But the anti-realist could have countless motivations. So, for example, I get into arguments about like movies, right? With the movie, that movie was like really good. You should watch that movie, right? I'm defending that idea, right? And I would get into like arguments with people about which movie they should watch and which movie is better. That doesn't mean that there is like some stance-independent fact about which movie is better, right? But yet we still do, we still engage in such type of like discourse. And clearly the motivation wouldn't be because there is stance-independent evaluative fact, but it's just like I want you to watch that movie. I want you to appreciate it, right? A lot to be said here. Also, he probably wouldn't agree with this characterization of moral realism because he probably thinks that morality has something to do with God, and he wasn't very successful into caching that. He just said the good is literally God. So, like when he says the movie is good, is he saying that the movie is God, or is he saying that he likes the movie or something else? It's like very unclear. But if like Jim Bob wants to talk about meta-ethics, like I'm very open to talk to you, Jim Bob. If you are watching this, just hit me up like anytime.
Well,
Yeah,
presumably.
also,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna say real quick. I think this is probably a classic case of like normative entanglement, where we have this like normative notion of rights and what rights people have, and then the moral realist are people who hold like more adjacent views like his. They say, well, if you're a moral anti-realist on the meta ethical level, then you aren't able to make these kind of claims on the normative level, like whether or not people have rights or like which things are good to do. And to clarify, normative entanglement is the idea of conflating normative ethical claims with meta-ethical claims. And normative ethical claims are your ordinary claims about saying, well, this is a good thing to do, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. He has a right to do this, he has an obligation to do this, etc. And meta-ethical claims are claims more so about what is it to be good, what is it to have an obligation, are these things objective or subjective, etc. And so because when we do metaethics, we're actually theorizing about the meaning of the concepts used in normative judgment. We're trying to provide some sort of conceptual analysis. And so all these normative claims people make all the time, regardless of if they're a realist or an anti-realist, or whether which one of those views turns out to be true, it doesn't actually affect the normative claims being made ordinarily. And so he thinks that if you're an anti-realist, you somehow aren't able to think that like normative claims can be true or false, but that trans people have rights for this example.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see that every time the moral realist say something like, well, the only way somebody can have rights is to use my concept of rights, which is going to be that it's a God-given right in his case or whatever, right? I don't think we need that to make normative claims. One could just make normative claims based on their perspective, and they can defend them. Nothing crazy about that. Nothing special about that.
Exactly. And at best, he didn't have to get rid of so much language. Like, even if that's just what he means, let's say he just defines rights as something having to do with God or whatever. And think about all the way people use the term rights that just doesn't have
Yeah,
anything
you
to
can
do with
just
God.
use Moore's objection about how
Yeah.
competent speakers use normative language there.
Yeah, you can aside from you could say, and to clarify that, you can kind of raise this idea that like you can sensibly question whether or not there are rights or not, or people have rights, in some way without reference to the concept of God. You can kind of like make a sort of open question consideration. Another thing is like you can also just say, well, even if that's what you mean, all these other people that use this language, that's certainly not what they mean, and all you're doing at best is just talking past them. And at that point, like what you're doing is kind of opening up a personal dictionary and having these revisionary notions of concepts that actually don't reflect what other ordinary people use.
Yeah. Also, I wanted to address the thing about so like obviously there, or at least I have an extremely strong suspicion that he doesn't think when people say they have a right that they're talking about anything stance independent or anything like that. So if the claim was that the only way you can have legitimate rights is if they were stance independent, he should have been more explicit about something like that.
Yep.
It's also unclear whether or not on his view it's going to be stance independent, right? It could be dependent on God, right?
Yeah.
So it could be like what Richard Joyce would call relation designation account, I believe.
Yeah, yeah.
Basically the idea that morality is like stance dependent, but there is like only one standard on morality, right? So it's still like anti-realist in a sense, right? But it's just one standard, right? And into other conceptions of like moral anti-realism, you are going to have like different standards, and there wouldn't be objective fact of the matter.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, gender is just a societal construct, right? And the other thing says that, well, relating to the main response I quote you from him, how would you respond to that, or should I just repeat it again?
I don't want to hear any more about monkeyboy, honestly.
Well, at least react to it because it's funny.
I'll check it out, but it's physically dumb. The guy's philosophy, it's just like it's whole school and nonsense.
His content is all ignored in monkey ways.
Yeah, but the thing is, you can't argue
with a dude like that, and he's a child. What I want to do is I want to challenge him to a fucking magic game and bees as magic.
I want to fight.
You should apply the child.
No, I want to fight. I want to figure out when is it appropriate. I guess we already have law. When is it appropriate to start to challenge young people to fight? Physical fights. I think it's good for them because we don't have like a mandatory like a military system, and I feel like.
Well, I guess we can finish it here because the rest of this is talking about he thinks he should have some like initiation ritual of masculinity in youth or something stupid like that.
An initiation mask. I can't even wrap my head around how dumb what he's saying. And if I'm being honest, like even this physical fight he's talking about, and I hate to say this, but like, does Jim Bob think he can? Like, does he think he's a kind of physically domineering?
Yeah.
I hate to say this, but the lack of self awareness is kind of appalling to me.
Yeah, this guy. There's no way this guy is going to be one who. He's probably just saying stuff like this to act. Like, there's no way he would expect to, be willing to fight most of the people he talks with over the internet and win.
Yeah, well, okay. Aside from the fight challenges, yeah. So I would hope that it seems like in terms of the size of his channel whatnot, it seems like the views you get on yours is somewhat. I could be wrong, but is it like on par with the views he gets, or am I wrong about that?
I'm not sure. Let me actually look real quick. I don't actually know how much he averages in views, but his channel's like huge in terms of subscriber count, and it's not
you're
close
right.
to the view count.
He has 18,000 subscribers. Oh no, yeah, he has. So his view, he seems to get about I'm gonna say about 3,000 views per. Some videos get like 1,000. So let's say about 3,000, 2,900 views. So it seems like you're roughly in that area. So like hopefully he's able to. I don't know. Maybe if he wants to talk, we can talk about more of this. But like, yeah, I don't really care about most of the fights or the jokes. Yeah, hopefully, I'm curious about some of the positions he laid out, some of his criticisms of your positions. It didn't seem like any of them, where there were criticisms, ended up working. So
yeah, so I guess
that would be interesting. So hopefully he responds to that, right?
It's likely he will, to be honest.
Yeah, we need some like clarity on like what some of the criticism even is, and hopefully Jim Bob, you read a little bit about deflationary theory of truth before you like criticize it. And yeah, Monkey Boy's channel is like better than yours, like subjectively, culturally, and of course stance independently. So yeah, that's the closing remark here, I guess.
We're done. All right, well, I guess we'll see if Jim Bob responds. And yeah.
Right.
It's fun to see their minds explode in real time.
Yeah.
I was told you wanted to debate people on presup.
On presup? No, not necessarily. We were talking about evolution.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a... Oh, sorry, you guys can't hear this. No, we're talking about evolution today, which includes some presuppositions, and tying it into a naturalistic paradigm, and how we're looking at Planet Peterson right now. And Planet Peterson says, he opened this video saying that everything that any organism does is specifically reduced to chemical reactions. So I was critiquing the entailments of such a position.
Oh, like what would the critique be?
The critique would be, premise one is everything all organisms do is a chemical reaction. Premise two, humans make evaluations and propositions. Premise three would be propositions and evaluations are chemical reactions. Premise four would be chemical reactions are neither true or false. And then the conclusion would be that you really can't have any knowledge under that view, because everything becomes an event in the world. And you can't say a chemical reaction is true or false if it's completely reduced to just actions and events that are determined by physics.
Yeah, I think what ought to be said there is that, like, so presumably what ought to be said there in this case is like, maybe the person doing the thing is a chemical reaction, but the proposition itself, doesn't have to be said. In fact, you might think it doesn't even exist.
Well, if he said everything, well, I would actually argue similarly. I'd say, well, if everything that occurs, that exists, is a chemical reaction, if he said, no, propositions aren't chemical reactions, then the conclusion would be propositions don't exist, right? Correct? Oh, you're muted. So that would be the end of the position, because if you said propositions don't exist, the proposition that propositions don't exist would be self-refuting. Like, what are we engaging with if the thing you just claimed doesn't exist itself was you'd be in a performative contradiction. So it's like, well, what is... Yeah.
Wouldn't be in a performative contradiction, because you might say, like, well, I've just made a statement that propositions don't exist.
Statements wouldn't exist, though.
No, there's a difference. Do you understand the difference between a statement and a proposition?
Well, a proposition, you can do a proposition inside your head. Are you saying a statement would be the sort of execution using a medium to deliver the proposition? Would be a statement?
Usually propositions are taken to be like the meanings or the content behind declarative sentences in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So statements are things you say. Sentences, you can write them down or whatever.
I understand.
And so the person in this case, and you can even think about certain things, you can have certain thoughts, and the person in this case might say, yeah, those thoughts exist, and the things I say and they write down, those exist in some way. But propositions themselves actually do not exist, right? So they might be like a nominalist or an anti-realist about them.
Yeah, I understand, but under the first premise that everything you do is a chemical reaction, there, first of all, isn't a you making a proposition. There's just a set of chemical bonds doing a thing. And whether the thing they're doing is, we call thinking, is one chemical reaction, or the thing they're doing is using words to communicate something, all of those things would be reduced to chemical reactions too. So even assuming the you-ness of somebody, like there's a person who's thinking and evaluating, that's just an object that's composed of a lot of different chemical reactions. So there's no real meaning or difference categorically between a waterfall doing its thing and a human doing what you call thinking and making statements or propositions. Even if you try to make the distinction, under physicalism, there is no meaningful difference between a proposition and a statement anyway. If it exists as some sort of phenomenal thing, epiphenomenal effect of physics, it's all under the same category. It's just effects of physics or events, physical events.
Yeah, so like I said, so first of all, we talked about the difference between sentences and propositions. Now, somebody who's a physicalist might say, yes, there is a distinction, and propositions, like as I kind of defined earlier, are not things that actually exist.
Hold on a second. You just totally hand wave the entailment of the position. You keep referring to there's a someone. I'm saying under physicalism there is no someone. There's an it.
Okay, so then let's go step by step here. So we're going from propositions to personal identity. Now you're saying if physicalism is true, then
there's only objects.
Be a someone. Well, that's just fine.
No, there's just objects.
There are various theories of theories assume
a person. Theories assume a mind. Under physicalism, there's only a brain that's producing effects of physics that are epiphenomenal. I'm not granting you theories, dude. That assumes the thing that's in question. A person coming up with a theory.
When you say you're not
granting person. Can you have theories? Can you have theories without a person?
What do you mean?
Can you develop a theory without assuming there's a person who's developing a theory?
Oh, You can't develop one. I never said anything about developing one.
Are people, persons with minds who have evaluations assumed, right? Are they necessarily a necessary component to develop a theory? You need that first, right?
To developing a theory?
Yeah, can theories exist without assuming persons who have minds developing theories?
I don't think theories exist.
You don't think theories exist. So you're saying, well,
Yeah.
There's this other line of thinking. I'm not asking what you think, by the way. I'm asking what the physicalist thinks, right, under this view. So the physicalist reduces, here, let's do it simple. Premise 1, events exist. Physical events exist, right? Premise 2, under physicalism, physical events themselves are not true or false, right? There's no true blade of grass, right? It's just an object.
Well, a physicalist might, for example, a physicalist might think that a sentence in some way, or if, at least it's the sort of like event of somebody affirming a sentence.
I didn't say that. I said, no, dude, stay focused. Stay focused. We're not talking about evaluating an event and talking about it, not second order. Events themselves out in the world right now. You don't say there's a true blade of grass and a false one, correct?
Yeah, but a physicalist could say that there are true and false sentences.
I didn't ask about sentences. Stay focused.
Well, they might
if you can't, dude, if you can't engage, you're going to waste our time. One step by step, dude. In the world, a physicalist looks at the world and sees a blade of grass and a flower. Neither of them are true or false. They're just objects, correct?
Yeah, flowers are not true or false.
Okay. Events are not true or false. Not the description of an event. An event unfolding that's physical with the flower or the grass or a tornado. Those also are, in the world, we would call them events, just events.
Yeah, I don't accept that events aren't true or false.
I'm not asking you what you accept. I'm not talking about the physicalist position.
There are events. I don't think there has to say that either.
Well, I didn't ask what you think he has to say. I'm asking if he doesn't say that events are neither true or false, he's got to say that events themselves are somehow true-theft.
He could say that some events are true-theft.
How can he point to a single event and say the event itself, absent talking about it, is true-theft?
Yeah, so for example, he might think like, if somebody says a sentence, he might think that sentence itself is an event.
I know, that's the thing in question, okay? So if the thing out in the world is not the sentence, then you've actually not given an account for how an event in the world itself, without the sentence, is true-theft. So I'm saying the first step is looking at the world. You see a bunch of events, right? And none of those events are true-theft. They're just events. They're not proper.
That's just a negation of what I said.
I know, but we're not at what you said because that's the thing in question. If a physicalist looks at the world and agrees with premise 1 that virtually every single known event in the world is not true-theft that we know of out there in the world.
Physicalist has to agree with premise 1.
What's that?
I don't see why a physicalist would have to agree with premise 1.
Well, he might reject it and then special plead and say the only event that he knows of that he thinks is an event that's physical is a proposition. And in that case, I still have him trapped because he's special pleading. He has to say that there's only one known thing inside the category of things called events, because that's what special pleading requires, is that you take something in the category of other things, in this case events, physical events, and it gives it a special, unique status that's contrary to every other status in the same category. So it's just special pleading.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what you mean. If by special pleading you mean they're saying that there are certain events that have a feature,
no,
one events don't.
No, not certain events. One event particularly.
No, because they'd be saying there's a class of events that have that feature. They wouldn't be saying just one event has it.
Well, no, they'd have to be particular. They'd have to be nominalists on this. They don't have a thing called category. They don't. No, hold on. They don't have a thing, a universal category called propositions. They only have particular events under their view.
Well, they don't have to take the view that categories exist in a substantive
Well, if they don't, that's a contradiction, because then they'd say particulars exist, right? Well, they'd have to say the contradiction would be particulars exist.
That's not a contradiction.
Yes, it is. What's a particular? Yeah, P and not P. Universals don't exist. Particulars exist. Particulars is a new universal. Contradiction.
Hold on. You don't have to say that. Well, hold on. When you say, so here's how the position would work. I'm just trying to make sure. So you're saying the contradiction is universals do and don't exist is what you want to say.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Now they're going to agree that like particulars exist. But when they say particulars exist, they're not committing to category of being a particular existent.
What? So what are they referring to then as the plurality of particulars if it's not a universal?
So they could say that they could say there's two things they could say here, right? So they could treat the universal of particulars as a kind of, fiction. That's one thing they could do.
Yeah.
Another thing they could do is they could say that the universal is a non-existing object. That's another thing they could do.
I understand. I don't care what they can do. Whether it's coherent is all I care
I'm trying to do is
about.
show you how that's actually not a contradiction. That's all
It is a
I'm trying to
contradiction. Oh, it's a contradiction by rejecting that anything exists such that there can be contradictions. Yeah, that sounds great. All right,
No, that's
all right,
not
bro.
what I said. You're
All
not
right, bro.
following.
I got to pull a J Dyer now. All right, bro. This is
You're
silly.
not following. So look, I gave two
So it's
ways
not
they
a
can do it.
contradiction because the thing
One thing
that
they
they're
can do-
assuming exists really doesn't exist, so there's no
One
contradiction.
thing they can do. Yeah. Okay. So
Okay,
if
yeah.
I don't know if you're being facetious or not, but to show it's consistent, I'm saying when they say particulars exist,
What are they saying?
right, that doesn't actually commit them to saying the category.
Hold on a second.
being
What are
particular.
they saying exists?
So
if
if you agree with that,
No,
you agree that their position is
no,
not
because
contradictory.
particulars itself is a category. So you're saying they could
Right, but
say,
they don't
hold on,
have to say that that
dude,
category exists.
hold on. What are they saying exists then, if not the category?
They're saying, hold on. When they
Hold
say,
on, hold on.
so
What?
when they
Answer my
say
question.
particulars-
Answer my
particulars are
question.
events.
No, answer my question. When they say particulars exist, what are they saying exists, please?
But they're just talking about events, specific events exist.
Oh, events now? Isn't that a universal category? Events, plural?
You don't have to say that the category exists.
So what are they saying exists when they say events exist?
Yeah, so, I mean, do you know what an event, are you asking me to define the word event?
I
or-
can't with these people. It's over.
Right. In the same way somebody can say dogs exist without saying the category of dogness exists, right?
I didn't say dogness. I'm talking about particulars. If you say universals,
I know.
hold on a
Analogy,
second,
right?
dude.
I know you
If
didn't
you
say
say
it.
if
It's
you
an
say
analogy.
if you say universals don't exist and you say particulars exist, I'm asking you,
Yeah.
what are they referring to when they say particulars plural?
When they say particulars plural, they're referring to specific events, right?
No,
And they
okay.
can think that
So if
specific events exist without
okay,
thinking that the
okay.
category.
Okay, guys. Again, I'm learning from my chat. You can't keep going with these sophists. He just shifted particulars to now events. There's no meaningful distinction, okay? If I ask you, what are they referring to that exists? They go, if not particulars, they say events. Well, I'm sorry, dude, but events now, plural, is now a universal. What is an event? You can't even talk about this shit without assuming the universal. The dogness of dog, Stephanus says. Yeah, what are you referring to by dog? What are you, a Muslim? No dog is like another dog. There's only one dog. The rest have to be dog 0.00, dog 2.0, dog 0.3 into infinity. It's just nonsense machines. These are nonsense machines. Shout out to Jay Dyer for teaching me the time length for those kind of calls. W's in the chat for Jim Bob, by the way, for me, for executing. Probably, maybe 1 minute too long. What do you think?